Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the Boeing 737 MAX. I'm Jeffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Germany. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Jeffrey.
So, viewers, this is episode 219. We're calling it Delegation, Trust and Turbulence. We're unpacking how US aircraft certification evolved into what many call a self-certification model for manufacturers, especially Boeing, and how the 737 MAX accidents reshaped that trajectory. We'll get into the designated engineering representatives, the ODA, and the post-MAX reforms. Before we dive in, just to repeat what we have said earlier, and that is that the entire industry, the entire aviation industry, is focused on the simplification and reduction of cockpit tasks so as not to overwhelm pilots in an emergency. But before we get into that detail, just a word, please do subscribe to us. Please do join us. We'd really appreciate you joining us. Like us, please keep those wonderful comments coming, and please do keep those fantastic questions coming as well. So firstly, the term self-certification is a misnomer. The FAA has long delegated specific compliance tasks to company designees, but the agency retains the legal authority over certificates. Still, the extent and structure of delegation expanded for decades until the MAX crisis forced a hard rethink. Correct, Richard?
Yeah. So, where did FAA delegation begin, Jeffrey, and why?
So, delegation is almost as old as US civil aviation regulation. Now, Aviation Week traces it back to the 1920s, with formal product certification designees emerging in the 1940s. The logic was straightforward. Regulators leveraged industry expertise to scale oversight without ballooning the agency's staff. Over time, this became a core operating model. The FAA focuses on system level safety and policy. Industry designees under FAA oversight help demonstrate compliance at the detail level.
So, many listeners know about the DERs, the designated engineering representatives, but not about ODA. How did we get from one to the other?
Okay, Richard. So by the late 1990s, the FAA Advisory Committee recommended consolidating designation schemes into a more structured organization-based model. The agency acted in 2005, creating Organization Designation Authorization, ODA. Instead of scattered individuals, the FAA approves a company unit with defined procedures, internal independence, and named members who can act with delegated authority within a controlled scope. This was meant to be more coherent and scalable than managing thousands of standalone designees.
So, ODA isn't a free-for-all.
Right. It's a formal FAA approved system with manuals, procedures, and FAA audits. But there was also a push to go even further towards something called a certified design organization, a CDO, a step beyond the ODA.
Well, let's discuss that one and that push. Where did the CDO concept come from?
Well, Boeing hired a former FAA certification head, Craig Beard, in the late 1990s to draft a white paper envisaging a certified design and production organization. The bold idea, grant type certificate applicants privileged akin to those of production certificate holders, essentially allowing a fully approved organisation to issue type certificates for its own designs without further showing. That language is crucial. It framed a future in which the company's internal quality and compliance systems would be robust enough that the FAA wouldn't need to re-show every step.
So did Congress bite on that one?
They sure did. The 2003 Vision 100 Century of Aviation FAA reauthorization gave the agencies authority to issue CDO status starting in 2010. And a 2008 rulemaking committee largely embraced the concept, including that no further showing idea. Industry pushed again in 2012 to keep CDOs alive legislatively. So by the mid 2010s, the arc of policy clearly pointed to deeper delegation, even if not fully realized. So Congress, which heavily criticized the system after the MAX crashes, signed it off in 2010.
Critics call ODA self-certification. Is that an accurate assessment?
Well, not really, Richard. In 2019, DOT Secretary Elaine Chao publicly defended ODA, stressing it is not self-certification program. The FAA designates people, sets boundaries, audits, and can overrule. But in practice, when delegation grows and agency resources are thin, it can look and feel like the applicant is driving the bus, even if legally the FAA holds the wheel. The perception became explosive after the MAX accidents.
So, how did the MAX crashes derail this century of delegation?
Well, Richard, it's alleged that Boeing obscured key 737 design changes, especially the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, MCAS, to avoid more costly training. Those actions impeded scrutiny that either ODA members or the FAA could have applied. However, it is my view that Boeing didn't take an aggressive enough view of MCAS failure and its outcome, relying on well-trained pilots to use the stab trim runaway as the failsafe. I believe the company became too focused on simplifying the cockpit systems and reducing pilot workload, which has been an industry goal, as we mentioned at the start, for decades.
So, how did all this play out then, Jeffrey?
The Aircraft Certification Safety and Accountability Act of 2020, the ACSAA, the law mandated human factors reviews in safety assessments, increased FAA involvement in critical areas, tightened ODA oversight, and crucially stopped the 20-year evolution towards a CDO-style model. It didn't abolish delegation, it narrowed it and rebalanced it, explicitly requiring more FAA input and changing how ODA members are approved and protected from internal pressure.
So, can we get specific on the ODA reforms, please?
Sure, Richard, there's several of them. First, the FAA now approves ODA unit members and sets clearer rules to let them communicate directly with the FAA engineers, intended to shield them from company pressure. Secondly, Congress requires periodic FAA audits of ODAs and pushed competency-based qualification for ODA roles. Third, there's a standing expectation for the FAA to study ODA and report improvements over time.
So, beyond ODA, what else changed?
A lot, Richard. The FAA launched a voluntary safety reporting program, VSRP, for its aviation safety workforce. This is a confidential channel to surface internal issues, mirroring non-punitive programs industry uses successfully. The agency also pursued safety management systems, SMSs, mandates for manufacturers, long discussed, now a centerpiece to make development oversight more holistic instead of transactional. Post-MAX, FAA policy updates and rulemaking have also targeted clearer thresholds for major design changes and codifying disclosure of safety critical information during certification.
So a lot changed because of the MAX. And what does the safety management system add?
SMS forces a proactive systems thinking approach, hazard identification, risk assessment, continuous improvement embedded in the manufacturer's governance. As then Administrator Steve Dixon told Congress, SMS gives the FAA visibility into the context of changes, not just compliance snapshots, and helps address cultural issues like undue pressure. That's vital when small software or integration tweaks can ripple into handling qualities or failure modes, as the Max taught us.
So the skeptics, however, say the agency can't possibly review every nut and bolt or bit and byte.
Yes, but Richard, that's historically why delegation exists. For instance, Aviation Week quotes FAA leaders emphasizing ODA's scalability. The idea is to match the depth of oversight with project complexity while keeping the pipeline moving. The post-MAX reforms aim to preserve that efficiency with guardrails. The FAA repeatedly signaled it doesn't want a backlog, it wants smarter oversight.
So, how does all this affect Boeing's ongoing certifications?
So, Richard, the tightened policies have impacted the remaining MAX variants, the Dash 7 and the Dash 10, and the 777X. For example, formal test authorization milestones and rework on systems like engine anti-ice redesign are proceeding under heightened scrutiny. The agency also finalised guidance in late 2023 tied to the 2020 law, such as stricter major change classification, which can influence test plans and compliance strategies.
So, going back to the MAX and the MCAS, what exactly failed with the MCAS and its certification process? Where did the system fail? Was it process or people or both?
Good question. Look, the process assumed incremental change on a well-known platform, the 737, which shaped the level of scrutiny. Boeing's documentation did not fully reflect MCAS's evolving authority and dependencies, which obscured the risk pathways. Delegation relies on transparency when information is incomplete or framed to minimize regulatory triggers. Delegated reviews can miss hazard escalations. Aviation Week summarizes it starkly. If either the ODA members or FAA had clear sight of the system, the safety case might have been judged differently.
So, is delegation dead? Some say the pendulum has swung too far back the other way. What does Aviation Week suggest, for example?
Richard, it's not dead, it's just rebalanced. Aviation Week quotes industry voices, noting that current delegation, properly run, is very robust and workable, even with added FAA oversight. The big casualty is the advanced CDO concept. The standard ODA regime survives with more formal guardrails and FAA involvement at critical junctions. That means longer timelines for some novel systems, but also a sturdier business safety case, I should say.
So, what does this mean for innovation? I mean, especially software intensive systems that we have these days. Are we risking stifling innovation?
Well, for software intensive controls, the bar on transparency, change management, and human factors validation is certainly higher. That may front load effort, but can prevent non-linear risk surprises later. Delegation can still streamline verification hunts for straightforward or well-bounded changes, while the FAA zeroes in on novel integrations.
So, lots changed with the FAA and Boeing, but what about the EASA and the European and the Airbus? Do they have the same self-certification system as the FAA and Boeing?
In a word, yes, they do. And in fact, we're showing a table now which outlines both Boeing and Airbus certification roles and the differences. So both the US and the European systems delegate significant certification work to manufacturers, but the mechanisms and the depth of regulatory review differ in important ways. In the US practice, the FAA's ODA lets companies like Boeing perform many compliance findings with FAA oversight. In Europe, EASA's Design Organisation Approval (DOA) structure authorizes approved design organizations, e.g., Airbus, to make certain findings within defined privileges under agency oversight. The headline similarity is delegation. The critical differences are scope, safeguards, and how often the regulator independently rechecks the technical basis. Europe's scheme is similar in spirit but different in texture. Under DOA, the design organization's competence, procedures, and privileges are formally approved. Certain compliance documents may be accepted based on those privileges, while EASA retains the right to review and audit and often does so, especially on higher risk or novel areas. That framework gives Airbus, like Boeing, meaningful ability to produce and sign off evidence of compliance, but not to self-certify the whole aircraft unilaterally. So similar but different is the answer to that question, Richard.
Yeah, it's a complex story, isn't it? And with aircraft systems getting even more complex with time, then the need for this dual role of certification becomes even more important and to get it right. So, have we got the right balance, do you think?
I think after the Max, I mean, the Max disasters, while, specifically Boeing, was a wake-up call for the entire industry on basically this issue, of course, the certification side of things, and it's tightened up at EASA, it's tightened up all around the world, and of course, obviously with the FAA, but has also changed the training of pilots dramatically. And I think we mentioned earlier in another episode that now a number of airlines that previously had not used Airbus or Boeing for their pilot training are now doing so because they recognize that they absolutely have to have the best training possible. I mean, there are other training organizations who are also absolutely first rate, and there has been a move to them as well. So there's been a significant upscaling of pilot training. At the same time, there's been a dramatic increase in the oversight and, as I mentioned, the guardrails to ensure that every single element is taken into consideration and there's 100% transparency of the whole system. Because as they tweak a system, they develop a new system, they tweak it, and the safety assessment says, yes, that's fine. Then they might tweak it some more, and then all of a sudden it's not fine. So there has to be a far more rigorous, and that's what's now happening, a far more rigorous oversight of the certification process and those designated to within the different manufacturers, a far more close look at what they're doing.
I think this is all a very useful background information before we go into the Lion Air and the Ethiopian Airlines MAX crashes in detail.
Look, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that viewers in our first episode, they sort of jumped the gun a little bit with questions, which is fine, except, really to really get the entire story, they need to watch or what is going to be 6 episodes to really understand how this situation, this terrible situation, evolved and the role of the airlines in this. In these two tragedies as well. There's a lot of lessons being learnt right across the industry. And as I mentioned at the very outset of this series, the MAX crashes were a watershed for the aviation industry. And there's so many things that have changed, not just at Boeing, but all over the place. And that's what we're going to document over the total of 6 episodes. Uh, So, viewers, that's all we've got for you today with the certification. Thanks for your involvement in this, Richard, in producing this episode.
You're very welcome.
And viewers, thank you very much indeed for watching. We'll be back tomorrow. So please do tune in. And as I mentioned earlier, please do subscribe to us. Please do support us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming and keep those great questions coming. Until tomorrow, thank you very much for watching. Take care.